On March 9th, 1919, Ruth Elwood was found wandering through the desert in Lincoln County. She was dehydrated and had strange markings across her body. The doctor who examined her stated in his report that due to her injuries and exposure to the elements, he was astonished that she was still alive. At the time, she refused to talk about what happened to her and was discharged from the hospital a couple of days later. On October 10th, 1919, Ruth visited the local police station. She appeared distressed and anxious and insisted on talking to an officer. This is the report from that interview, in which Ruth gives her first-hand account of what happened those fateful days in the desert during March 1919.
Growing up, I loved my father and would have done anything for him. When he told me he'd arranged for me to marry the banker's son, I was elated. He was a handsome man from a wealthy family. I thought marrying him would mean love and stability. Oh, how wrong I was. At first, he was charming and kind, but it didn't take long for his act to fade. He could be so callous and cruel, and his mood would switch without warning. He scolded me once for overcooking his stew, another time for looking the wrong way at his friend. My father saw the bruises. He knew what was going on. I ran over there once in torn clothes with fresh bruises and pleaded for him to help, but instead he dragged me back home and made me apologize to my husband for leaving. I realized then that I'd been nothing more than a business action for my father's gain. My husband owned me and could do with me as he pleased. On the morning that my husband gave me my black eye, I packed a satchel with dried food and a flask of water and left the house and kept on walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just let my feet carry me. I just wanted to get out of there, and at the time I wasn't thinking practically. In my mind, anywhere, including far out there in the barren desert, was better than being near him. I walked for I don't know how long. It must have been hours. I'd left early that morning, but by the time I stopped, I was deep in the desert and the sky was darkening around me. That's when the gravity of the situation hit me. I was miles from home. My body ached, my mind frantic. I didn't know whereabouts I was, and I knew it would soon be pitch black. I sat by this weathered tree and tried to make sense of it all. I knew I'd have to go back. I had nowhere else to go. I know that walking in the dark with no source of light wasn't an option. So I'd have to sleep out until first light. I wasn't afraid of spending the night out there, even though I'd grown up hearing the stories of horrors that roamed the desert. Everyone in my town knew someone who disappeared out there. Back then, I didn't believe in those kinds of monsters. As I saw it, I was already living with the real monster. But the horrors I saw out there in the desert turned out to be far worse than I ever could have imagined. As the darkness arrived, so did the cold. The temperature can quickly drop when the sun goes down. I only had a cotton shawl with me that provided only a little warmth. My exhaustion must have been enough. As I fell asleep, I woke up in the pitch darkness and realized my arms were bare. My shawl had gone. Thinking it must have fallen off, I patted my hands around the sand grains and the rough grass, trying to find it. I didn't find anything. Then I touched something else. Something small, with coarse fur, matted with something lumpy. However, the strange thing was that it felt flat. I felt the fur of an animal, but it was lacking any substance to it. I thought it must have been a dried up rodent of some sort, and vultures or foxes had been at it. The mind plays tricks on you when you're unable to see anything, but I kept telling myself it was just a mangled, dead desert wood rat. I dropped it with a squeal. It made me feel uncomfortable knowing that it was right there next to me, but I knew that roaming around in the pitch black would have been foolish. Besides, there would be plenty of critters out there in the desert, alive ones. regardless of which part of it I went in. So I wrapped my arms around my legs and I stayed like that all night, with my back pressed against the trunk of that weathered tree. I caught myself sliding from the trunk a few times, promptly propped my exhausted body up. I flinched every time I heard something rustle close to me, and I was sure I heard movement close to me. Footsteps, but sounded too sharp and agile to belong to a human. I didn't sleep properly after that. I shivered all night. I'd never felt that cold before. A coldness that seemed to creep beneath my skin and bury itself there. I knew it. I knew that I wasn't alone out there and that something horrifying was out there with me. But at that point, I just didn't want to believe it. At first light, I witnessed the true horror of what I'd been holding the night before, and it made me feel sick to my core. I was surrounded by dozens of rodents. At least that's what I think they once were. There was a circle of them. They hadn't been there when I stopped by that tree, so they must have been placed like that. But that wasn't all. The most disturbing part was that all of their innards were missing, as if they'd been sucked straight out. It was just their furry skin, droopy, blood-stained. I'd never seen anything like that before. There were specks of blood in the sand, but not enough. Not nearly enough if the attack had happened there. Whatever had done this to these rodents had done it away from there and then moved them. I'd never known an animal to gut their prey like that or to place it so purposely in a circular shape. No animal I knew of would do such a thing. In my distress, I thought it was my husband. He sent someone to do this to me, to make me think I was losing my mind. If this was the case, then it worked. I was terrified. I touched my black eye and saw the realization that I had to go back. I had nowhere else to go, so I could either die out there in the desert, or I could go back home to him. Each one of those rodents didn't just have its innards removed, its eyes were gone too. A dark void stared back at me. The one I'd picked up in the night was by my side. I saw maggots in the empty eye sockets, wriggling there, thriving upon the decay. I couldn't stop looking at them and wondering, would I end up meeting the same fate? I started walking back to town, but I couldn't shake that horrifying sight from my head. I was low on water, and only allowed myself a small sip every couple of hours, so I was also dehydrated. I think this played a part in my disorientation and led me to walk deeper into the desert, then away from it. But I don't know for sure. It could have just been that the desert didn't want to let me leave. I was certain I was going the right way. I was certain I saw the church steeple in the background and the uneven outline of the town buildings, but it must have been my own mind playing tricks on me. As I walked, I was aware I wasn't alone out there. Something else was out there with me. I heard these sounds. These strange, deep breathing sounds. I heard movements close by, behind the bursts of tanglehead grass. I thought I was imagining it, but now I know I wasn't. Now I'm certain something was out there watching me. By the time I admitted to myself, I was lost somewhere in the desert. I was down to my last sip of water. My skin was scorched from the sun. My thin leather boots almost worn to nothing. And I was terrified of both the desert and returning this late and in this state to my husband. The thoughts of what he would do to me were even more terrifying than the prospect of another night out here. In that weathered desert plain with whatever it was that did that to those rodents. As I prepared for my second night alone in the desert, I finished my water and made peace with myself. My life hadn't gone the way I envisioned. There was nothing I could do about that now. As it started to darken, I heard the bird calls close by, dozens of them. I wondered if it was vultures, with their eyes set on me, but I couldn't spot them circling above me. I crouched down behind the tanglehead plant, but I knew it provided little cover. I took my shoes off and studied my blistered feet. When I looked up, I spotted it ahead of me, caught in the grass. It looked like a piece of material. I walked barefoot over to see what it was and gasped. It was a piece of my shawl. I was sure of it. It looked like the material had been torn. It didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense how it would travel there, especially not in the still air. I turned around and asked if anyone was there, but only silence answered me. I walked along the long grass, trying to find any other signs of my shawl. That's when I saw it. My shawl, or at least some of it. It was tied around this withered, shriveled thing. I reached out to take it, and the shriveled thing rolled over. I didn't just scream. I wailed. It was a human head, at least what was left of it. A man's, I think, but the skin was so scarred and shriveled it was hard to tell for sure. It had this scraggly dark hair sprouting out of it in bursts. Strands and strands of it. Just like the rodents, it had no substance to it. It was this deflated, wrinkled, leathery thing. Its eye sockets were empty. Flies buzzing in the gaps. They were moving dots in the darkness. I'd never seen anything so horrific. It was so disgusting I couldn't help but vomit. Then I clutched my hands over my mouth and started running, barefoot. I just don't know what did that to that person, or where the rest of their body was. My heartbeat echoed so loudly it masked my footsteps, but it didn't mask my fear. I just didn't understand why that head was wrapped in my shawl. I turned and ran, shoeless and thoughtlessly through the desert. As I ran, I heard something following me. These muffled grunts, as if whoever was there was covering their mouth as they moved. I didn't look back, I just kept on running. But as it was darkening, and the ground was rocky and uneven, I tripped over a tuft of grass and tumbled onto the ground. I was aching. My whole body burned like fire. The sounds grew around me. Those muffled, breathing sounds. My eyes darted around the area to try and place it, but I couldn't see anything. My heart was thudding within my chest with such force I thought it would explode inside of me. I thought this was it. This was my end. I'd die out there and that thing would drain me alive and keep my skin as a trophy. That it'd use my lifeless remains to taunt other people who got lost out there. I tried scrambling backward, using my hands behind me to move me. I ignored the pain from the sharp rocks and sharp grass and kept on moving. Those muffled sounds echoed around me, all around me, impossible to place. And I heard the footsteps, sharp, quick. They didn't sound like human footsteps. Then my worst fears happened. Something stepped out of the darkness and moved toward me. I don't fully know where it came from, only that it appeared. I couldn't see it properly in the gloom, but I saw enough to see that it was carrying something. A body. A deflated, withered, rotting body. Bits of torn fabric were stuck in the rotting teeth. It hung in this thing's arms like it was nothing more than a coat. I couldn't move at this point. I was completely frozen in fear. I clasped my filthy hands over my mouth to stop my screams of despair, but it didn't matter. It already saw me. As it moved toward me, I saw the being's bottom half. This thick layer of black feathers, and instead of feet, it had talons. Talons like a bird's. I had to blink my eyes to check if I was going crazy. But I saw it. I saw what I saw. It peered down at me with human eyes, set in a not altogether human face. The eyes, something about the eyes didn't look right. They were too small for its face. There was a gap around them, one void of darkness. It was as if they'd slotted them into a hole too big for them. It walked over to me and I couldn't move. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I knew that if it wanted to drain me like it did that man and those rodents, I couldn't stop it. I had no fight left. It came toward me, watching me with those ill-fitting eyes, and then it stopped in front of me. It sniffed the air. Then in a swift movement, it dropped the limp, lifeless, deflated carcass on top of me. It covered me like a blanket. The flaps of withered skin caught in my mouth and pressed against my arms and face. I smelt it. I smelt the decaying flesh. Having that on me was horrific, and I tried flinching it off me but ended up more entangled in it. When I finally got it off me, I cried with relief and fear. Fear that this was about to happen to me. But that thing, it had gone. I thought it was taunting me, but I forced myself to my feet and made myself move barefoot across the darkening desert. I walked and I walked, gasping for breath and inconsolable. I didn't think I'd make it, but then I don't know what happened. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital. The nurse told me that someone had found me wandering by the road, making no sense. I have no recollection of that. No recollection at all. I let out a silent scream when I saw my husband in that room with me, his dark eyes alive with anger. I was free of that creature that was out there in the desert, but I wasn't free of my husband. In that hospital room, I saw my body, my injuries, all symmetrical, as if they were marking out a pattern. I felt my cheeks sting and felt it. They were on my face too. Cuts only caused by something sharp, like talons. I don't know what happened after I saw that thing and headless body in the desert, and I don't know why that thing didn't kill me. I'm convinced those eyes were stolen by that thing from its deflated victim. I'm convinced the scars on my body mean something. Just thinking about it haunts me more than I can express in words. The fear I feel is incomprehensible. It aches through my entire body. A fear that it's out there somewhere in the desert, but that no one believes me. A fear that one day it might find me again and finish what it started. A fear that my scars mean something. Something unexplainable.
On hearing Ruth's account, officers searched the desert but without an exact location, were unable to find the area that matched Ruth's story. Records show that a young man was reported missing in the desert on the 7th of March, 1919, one with dark hair. He was never found. On the 3rd of November, 1920, Ruth Elwood's husband admitted her into a mental asylum for hysteria. Records show that while there she exhibited signs of delusional behavior and spoke of a strange creature in the desert, and her markings meaning something. She died in the asylum in 1923. Her cause of death was listed as unknown. The truth of what really happened to Ruth Elwood in the desert of Lincoln County all those years ago died with her. To this day, many strange occurrences and disappearances are still recorded there.
For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.